things that are really important, and if you're not seeing these things, then they should be major red flags. They're not in this book. It's kind of my own contribution to this training from the CDC, but I wanted to make sure you were thinking about it and looking at it. And it's called joint attention. Joint attention is a really critical skill that starts early in life. We're all engaged in joint attention right now. What it is, it's the coordination of attention with a third object. So you and I are connected, we're paying attention to each other, and we're all paying attention to this board and these videos. You want children to be doing that with you. You want them to be paying attention to something else outside of your interaction with them together, because that's how learning happens. You can't focus on a math problem with a child if they're not focusing on you, focusing on the math problem. It's really a critical part of learning. So I want to show you a really early example that's really fast. Any of your classrooms can see this kind of stuff, but it's just really critical.
You see, and the doggy is saying hi to the bear.
So let's slow it down. This is how fast it happens at 15 months. And it starts as early as 9 months. So she's pointing to something, right? And then she's looking back at mom. Are you looking at what I'm looking at? Oh, you are?
And we're done.
And now that you're paying attention, boom. How do you feel about that?
You see, and the doggy is saying hi to the bear. That's it? No more? No more? Nothing.
So if you were to pick one skill that is a predictor of learning and development, the research says it's this. Yep. So paying attention to you, paying attention to something else. So it's very important. And then, I love, and I think this is missing so much in education outside of early education, but the importance of play. So critical. And, these books are really helpful in kind of those play situations. You get to see a lot of stuff. Like, you create the opportunity, but then you can really step back and watch kids do what they do, which is amazing. And I'm not going to watch the video right now, but play can tell you a lot about development. And I would actually encourage that the best time to use these kinds of books and checklists is during those moments. So this is all right. So before we go into this, do y'all want to take a couple minute break? You good? No, I'm good. I
We
just
have to leave since it was
What time is it?
11:05.
Is everybody good?
I'll make it really brief.
No, you're not. No,
Oh.
I just want to make sure
fine, you're
nobody
fine.
was had
Yeah.
cancer. Yeah, and it doesn't look like anybody does, so you're good.
Okay. All right. Well, then we'll just move forward, and I'll try to keep this to 20, 25 minutes, because lunch is coming up here, and you've had a long day of listening to all the things that you need to get ready for. So it's about talking to parents when they have developmental concerns, or when you have a developmental concern. The CDC has done some research into what seems to be the most effective motivational way of getting parents to do what they feel is in their child's best interest and in line with what's important to them. Because what's important to us isn't always what's important to parents, or even what's doable. We don't know every detail of everybody's life. Even no matter how tight-knit our community is, we can't always anticipate that. But I'm just curious if anybody's had to have conversations with parents about developmental concerns.
Back in the day, kiddos that we suspected were on the spectrum before it was even called the spectrum,
Yeah.
mean, we literally would take them by the hand to their pediatrician or wherever because so much was not really known and it was, just viewed really in a negative kind of, so
Yeah.
it was, very hard, Parents like to protect, their mama bears and papa bears, they like to protect and they don't. So, you can't even really call it denial, it's just, there wasn't a lot of education knowledge out there at the time.
Yeah.
So,
Sometimes that's what's needed. But I'm just kind of curious. So I'm kind of hearing some. You all kind of think a little bit about it too. What are
We
your
were
thoughts?
saying we had to bring up a possible speech problem with the husband, the dad, when the mom is a speech therapist. She wasn't there. The dad was at the parent-teacher conference, and he's like, "Really? I'm surprised Mom didn't say anything about this." Her husband, and we were like, "Oh."
Gee, that is tough.
It was awkward.
So what are that's a good example of like maybe the conversation being a little bit tough for us, right?
Yeah.
Because we have experiences too. It is about the parent and how they feel, and we're thinking about that and worried about that, but it's also about how we feel, and about how we feel about this can influence whether or not we are likely to have the conversation and actually actively seek it out, or whether we kind of try to avoid it till like the last minute. So I kind of want to talk about the hard part. And so I'm kind of hearing one is like it's kind of awkward to have the conversation sometimes.
Yeah, the hardest ones that I've had are when I think kids have gone through trauma, and I think kids possibly they have emotional trauma, and it's because of things maybe that might be going on at home.
Yeah.
And so then there is personal, those are the hardest conversations to have, and because then parents do feel like it is their fault.
Yeah.
And those are, to me, always the hardest conversations to have, because there's some home issues, and I feel like possibly like when kids have suffered trauma and it's affecting, because there's behavior and then there's emotional stress, and then it's turning into behavior in the classroom, and not just behavior but everything, and then it affects their performance and their everything at home, and they need some outside help.
So do you feel, it sounds like you're feeling a little bit of like trepidation, a little bad.
I don't want it to come across as accusatory to the parents, is what it is.
So you're worried that maybe they'll feel blamed for what's happening in the classroom, and you suspect that maybe there's some stuff going on in the home that might be contributing. Yeah.
And then that's when in a setting like where we're at now, in the public school, I always had the access to a counselor or something, that could we could go that route, and there was always CPS and all of that. But here it's kind of like it's a little different. It's us.
Yeah. Yeah, you all are everything. It's like what I have learned about early childhood educators is you do like everything. It's like you gotta potty train, you gotta feed, you gotta like teach them how to be like good friends. You've gotta teach them how to learn. You gotta have conversations with parents. You gotta be the counselor. So what's it like for you when you like kind of think about having that conversation with?
Just have to choose your words carefully, and the setting also. You want to make sure the time and place and words and who you bring with you. You just have to choose everything carefully.
I was taught in grad school you actually start with a positive to kind of get them in before you.
Yeah, and
Very
everything has to
sensitive.
be chosen carefully. Yeah.
Well, you just took one of my research books.
Yeah.
She's done a lot of research.
No, that's right. Well, I think I've talked to some people that worry about what will happen if they have the conversation, like the outcome they're thinking about. On the one hand, it's like, yeah, maybe they'll get some extra help, but then what's the possible downside of this conversation? And so, is there anything that comes up to your mind about like some, what's the worst thing that could happen?
They'd put it on the Reader Ranch forum.
Somebody on social media is like, oh, that Jennifer, she's.
Well, and the worst thing, they'll pull them out of the school.
Yeah.
They'll run away,
Yeah.
Right.
you know, and hide from the problem
Yeah.
and not do anything for the child.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's been a fear that I come across a lot is like, man,
Losing the relationship of
Mhm.
you and the parents and the.
And the kids, because we
Well,
want what's best for them.
And the best conversations are probably the easiest when you have already established a really good
Yes.
relationship, and there's that trust factor that is coming from a good place and not an accusatory place. Those go the best.
yeah, and sometimes it's possible, and actually a lot of times that's possible, and then sometimes it's like, sometimes not, and you know, I know I've had conversations with family members, with, you know, friends, with people that, you know, I interacted with professionally, and it always produces some anxiety for me, and I feel like a bad person, kind of like, it's like, oh man, should have done that differently, or this is gonna be awful, you know, the thoughts that just come up, and, you know, I just think it's the reality of being the position that we're in sometimes is like, we're gonna feel a lot of like unpleasant feelings, we're gonna have negative thoughts about ourselves because that's what our brains do. They look for threats and they try to help us avoid those threats. But I think something that's been helpful is like to connect in those moments to like what's important. You know, what's important to you is who are you? You know, what kind of person do you want to be? And if you can kind of hold on to that, then you might answer the question of like, is this worth it? And I would say that the answer, at least in my own journey, is like yes. Like I'm willing to experience all of that stuff in the service of helping kids get the help they need early on and making sure they reach their potential.
And sometimes we just plant the seed, and then by second, third grade, those parents who maybe were like, I can't believe you, come back and they go, thank you, or
Yes.
it takes that long for them to really come to the realization and get the help. But at least we started the process and
That's such a good point.
planted the seed.
Acceptance isn't like a right now thing for everybody. It's also a sequence of experiences. So I just wanted to kind of talk about that. Like I get it. Like the things I'm gonna ask you to do, there are possible negative outcomes, but I think we're not in control of those outcomes all the time. And what we've got to do is what we think is best for what we care about, which is the
And
kids.
we have to remember that because we have them at such a young age, we're generally gonna be the first people to tell them this.
Yeah.
So it's
Good
gonna be a
point.
shock to the system, yeah. So we're gonna bear the brunt of their shock.
Yep.
Most of the time.
I would agree. But there are some things that we are in control of, and that's how we present this